Hey guys, it's Mr. Ullman's, probably with the last video I'll do. We're going to be wrapping up the war today, talking about the aftershocks of what happens when the Nazis are defeated. And then we're done, and so get pumped, get excited, and let's dive right in. Whoa, how did I get over here? I always wanted to do that. But let me go ahead and get right into it here. So what we're going to do really quickly today is just finish the war. And I am not going to go through all this. You should be doing that on your own. This is the course of the war. Look at my previous video on D-Day, and that's how we get into France, and we make this push towards Berlin. The biggest thing remaining for the United States military is called the Battle of the Bulge. That's in Band of Brothers if you want to watch that again. Some really good episodes on Bastogne. But go ahead and look at those on your own time. And here we are, May 7th, 1945. Germany surrenders. That's known as VE Day, or Victory in Europe Day. And then what we have is we advance through the Pacific. We've eliminated Hitler first, and we're going to advance through the Pacific doing our island hopping. Go back to my previous videos. We know the turning point in the Pacific is Midway, and we island hop from Midway and these other islands all the way as far as we can get, battling heavily in places like Iwo Jima and Okinawa. Iwo Jima, of course, being known for this famous photo right here, came at a very high price. And that's important to know, actually, because for a little tiny island, look back to the map, a little tiny island like that, look how many deaths it cost and how long it took. So why we're talking about that is because if Japan, being as big as that is our next target, well, how much longer will it take? How many more lives will it take? And that kind of helps us a little bit better to understand the decision that was made by President Truman to, of course, drop the atomic bomb. And so what happens is FDR has died in early 1945. Harry Truman, his vice president, has taken over, and he has a decision to make. This Manhattan Project, which has been in development for the course of the war, it's led by Oppenheimer, actually, not Einstein. Oppenheimer is the one who's heading this. And they eventually, of course, test successfully the first atom bomb. And we have these debates, and I'm going to have you go over those on your own. I think you probably know what these debates are. So I'm going to list them up here right now, but you can also follow through on the PowerPoint that you have on the website. But why did they drop it? And it's really this one. It saves U.S. soldiers from having to invade Japan. But there are a whole host of other good reasons too. But of course, the opposite is a huge casualty toll on the civilian population of Japan. I'm going to actually link to some videos up here in the video, so make sure that you follow those, investigate them further if you want. But like I said, to save time, I'm expecting you guys already are familiar with this, and we're going to move on. So as you know, the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, after that, there can be no more fighting for the Japanese. On August 15th, VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day, and the war is over. And more importantly, this is going to open up a whole new era of foreign policy and diplomacy. If we have these, that puts us above everyone else, these atomic bombs. If we have them, we are in charge of the world. But what happens when someone else gets them, like the Soviet Union? Well, that changes things entirely. And so we'll talk about that when we go over periods 8 and 9 after AP exams. But we see the total cost of World War II, why we talk about it, is 60 million people, huge casualty toll.
So what I wanted to do is just kind of screencast the post-war conferences and their effects. And that's kind of a misnomer. They're not really post-war conferences. But let's go to Yalta Conference. This is in February of 1945. What they know is that the writing's on the wall. After the Battle of the Bulge, it's pretty obvious what's going to happen here. The Allies are going to win, the Axis are going to lose. And so point one is kind of the biggest thing from this, and that's an agreement to divide Germany into 4 occupation zones. This matters in period 8 when we talk about East Germany versus West Germany, the Berlin airlift, and that kind of stuff. So that's the biggest point you need to know. But an agreement was made also that Eastern Europe would have free elections to determine new government. So this is actually the most important for us immediately, because Stalin agrees that he's going to allow the people of Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary to have free elections to determine their government. He didn't want to do this, but he felt like he had to if he could count on the Allies to still win the war and finish off the Nazis. So we're going to come back to that, all right? Number 3, Japan says Japan would assist. That should actually say Russia. So the USSR would assist in invasion of Japan later, although we know we're not going to need their help. And number 4, a new world peace organization would be created. And what is that called, class? The United Nations. That's right. The League of Nations after World War I failed. This one is going to be different. So that's the Yalta Conference. Make sure you study that one. And again, these first 2 are the most important. And why number 2, I said, is most important for us immediately, is because after this meeting, Stalin broke his promise. He had occupied Eastern European countries. Remember, he is pushing from Stalingrad all the way to Berlin. And when he liberates these countries from Nazi control, he more or less just takes them over himself. And at Yalta, he was supposed to allow free elections, but he does not. He says that if he is going to allow free elections, they will not choose communism, and so therefore he won't let them vote. And why this is so important is because this is the beginning of the Cold War. This is where it happens. We were best buds with the Soviets in World War II because we had a common goal: defeat the Nazis. Now, that common goal is gone. We've defeated the Nazis. It's July. The war in Europe is over. And so now we can kind of confront them on this. So Stalin again, Truman, because FDR has died, and Clement Attlee eventually will take over. Churchill's there for a little bit, but Attlee takes over. But the point really is that, number 1, they vow here, yes, to accept an unconditional surrender of Japan. Okay. They agreed to hold war crime trials in Nuremberg. Okay. But the biggest issue, all right, and this is really what the takeaway, forget studying the other things. The biggest issue is Stalin's refusal to allow free elections in the East. Like I said, this is what starts the Cold War. We cannot trust Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Union anymore. We feel like they are trying to spread their communism, which was very harmful. The Stalin version of communism, there is no debate about it. It was not good. It was brutal. It took away people's freedoms. So we don't want them to be able to spread, and we can't trust them because they won't allow free elections or democracy. So those are your Allied post-war goals. We see the Potsdam and Yalta conferences have seemed to sow discord between the U.S. and Soviet Union, and that's really, like I said, the most important takeaway.
Okay, I'm back. So let's wrap this thing up a little bit here. Not only is Europe changed by this, but we're going to find out in periods 8 and 9 that the rest of the world is impacted by this. Look at China. They go through a civil war, and it's between this guy, Chiang Kai-shek, who's a non-communist, and we have Mao Zedong, who is a communist. So, of course, whose side do we take but Chiang Kai-shek's? But, of course, who do you think wins this war? And that's, of course, Mao Zedong. And so this is going to begin a policy by the United States of containment. It's happening in Europe. It's happening in China. It's going to happen in Korea, Vietnam. You guys get it. So the world changes here. And so by the end of World War II, we have 2 superpowers. The United States. Our industry is booming. Look at my war production videos. We have a military superiority with the atomic bomb, but also we kind of put our money where our mouth is with the military. But on the flip side is the Soviet Union, who's steamrolled all over Eastern Europe, and they industrially are a giant as well. Now, their people, their citizens are suffering because of it, but they are the next nation that the United States has to contend with. And this is going to be that Cold War, which is the focus of periods 8 or 9. But just want to hammer it home one more time, the United States is no longer isolated. You have never grown up in a United States that has been isolated. And that's because after World War II, game changes completely. And so we help to establish a World Bank that looks out for the finances of other nations. The GATT, which is trying to regulate international trade. The U.S. is all over it, right? And whether you agree with it or not, of course, what you should know is this is a huge shift in the role of the United States. And of course, they helped form the United Nations, which I don't think you guys need to really identify what that is, because you already should know. This is, of course, a huge thing. So we see the United States stepping away from isolation and more towards a global police presence, which, of course, you guys have grown up with. All right, we'll wrap this up here in just a second. Let me snap again.
Okay, so in wrapping up, after all these videos, after all this unit, what do we need to know? And this is that there is a new American identity. That the United States that we all, including me, have grown up in is one of a global leader, that the United States stands for good and justice throughout the world, even though we kind of roll our eyes sometimes at that. But the war had ingrained in the United States a new American identity that stands for democracy, tolerance, and peace. And again, we're going to get to the eye roll for a little bit there, but this is who we are. We are the leaders of the free world. You probably heard that phrase. And World War II is what cemented that. Because again, World War I, we went back into isolation afterwards, and then we were in depression. But after World War II, people looked to us. Whether you like the United States or not, you look to us for leadership and guidance for the most part. And so that's who we are. We are the keepers, protectors of the 4 freedoms that FDR talked about in that assignment I gave you guys. So this is the new American identity. We fly our flags. We're very proud of it. However, I said there was a little bit of an eye roll because, of course, attention is now going to be called to, if we are really there to stand for tolerance. We liberated the concentration camps. We talked about how evil that was. We put people to death in the Nuremberg war trials because of the Holocaust. Then we have to kind of look at ourselves and say, well, how is it different from what's going on in the United States? And yes, I get it. It is different. But these 2 pictures, this is from a concentration camp in World War II, and this is a picture taken in Birmingham, Alabama. Now, I actually have a lot to say about this picture. It's not as bad as it looks, but I think it proves the point that we're trying to make, and that is that the United States has to address this and will in period 8 when you talk about the civil rights movement. As we trace, again, the civil rights movement, not starting in the 50s or 60s, but we've talked about this all the way through this course. So at the end of the day, the other thing to keep in mind, I just want to remind you guys, is that the Great Depression is over. I think this chart will show it to you very clearly. Now, this is just through 1941, but it just gets better after this. After World War II, the U.S. economy is in full bloom. It is just roaring like crazy. And so the Depression is over. Wealth is redistributed. Wealth is redistributed. And so we have a healthier economy with a larger middle class. Certain regions are growing. We see a lot of aerospace technology that emerged in Florida and in Alabama and in Texas. So the government, or the country, is evolving and changing to a much more balanced, powerful economy. And then lastly, the government continues to play a large role in our lives ever since the beginning. The question was, should the federal government have a large role in our lives? And the anti-federalists were saying, heck no. Jefferson, no way. But as we've gone through this course, we've seen that slowly, bit by bit, and usually through crises, the United States federal government is going to play a much more big part in our lives.
Oh, I love it. It's amazing. So that's it. But again, I don't want you to minimize just how big a deal the conclusion of this war was. It sets up a Cold War. It establishes the United States as a global police power throughout the world, where we're much more interventionist. And what we're going to see in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s is the United States spending a lot of money, getting involved all over the place to try and stop the spread of communism and to try and protect our economic interests throughout the globe. So I hope you guys enjoyed this series of videos. It was definitely interesting. Of course, we're going to focus now on review for the AP exam. So I'll see you then. Bye, guys.